Snow drifted across the empty roads of Jackson Hole, wrapping the world in white silence. A retired Marine named Ethan Briggs stopped beside a forgotten shipping yard, and for $5 he bought a rusted container everyone else called junk. They laughed, said he'd lost his mind. But when his loyal German shepherd, Valor, began barking at the steel wall marked Ward 17, Quiet Timber, Ethan realized this wasn't just scrap metal. Inside that box slept a secret buried for decades, one that would test his faith, awaken his courage, and remind the world that sometimes the smallest act of curiosity can uncover the biggest miracle. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe that God still works through quiet hands and loyal hearts, hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and stay till the end. This story might just make you believe again. The wind clawed across the valley like a living thing, dragging fine snow over the mountains and the empty road curling through Jackson Hole. The cold there did not simply bite. It spoke, a low and steady whisper that only men who had lived through silence could understand. Ethan Briggs understood it well. Once a U.S. Marine, now a man of quiet routines, he lived alone in a cabin at the edge of the forest where the Tetons rose like gray ghosts. He was in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that carried the geometry of discipline, square jaw, weathered skin, and a faint scar tracing his left cheek like an unfinished sentence. His dark hair had begun to gray around the temples, not from age, but from things he had seen. He kept a short beard, not out of fashion, but because shaving each morning felt unnecessary when the only witness was a dog. That dog, Valor, was a German shepherd of about 5 years, muscular and alert, his coat a mix of black and tan with eyes the color of old amber. He had served as a therapy dog for Ethan's unit during a long deployment in Afghanistan before being retired for the same reason Ethan was. Too many ghosts to carry, not enough noise to drown them. Valor's right ear had a small tear from an explosion years ago, and though he moved with confidence, there was a softness in his eyes when he looked at his master, as if he too remembered the dust and sirens. They were, in their own way, 2 veterans of the same war, now surviving a quieter one. On that morning, Ethan's breath curled through the cold air as he drove his beat-up pickup toward the county storage lot. Snow coated the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. He had heard about an auction. The county was selling off unclaimed items, everything from busted tractors to rusted containers left behind by logging companies. He had no particular need for anything, but the thought of other people, of voices and movement, felt like an unfamiliar invitation. Since the war, crowds made him anxious, but silence had begun to feel too much like absence. At the lot, a handful of locals huddled near a fire barrel while the auctioneer shouted prices that no one really cared about. Sarah Whitmore, the county clerk overseeing the auction, stood at a folding table covered in paperwork. She was a woman in her early 40s, slim and sharp-featured, her cheeks pink from the cold. Her auburn hair was tied back beneath a wool hat, and her coat, long and gray, flapped in the wind like the flag of someone too stubborn to surrender. She had a no-nonsense air about her, the kind of woman who had learned to run an office full of men who thought organization was optional. When Ethan arrived, Sarah looked up with a small smile. "You're either lost or desperate," she said. "Nobody sane comes out here in this weather." "Maybe both," Ethan replied, his voice low and steady, carrying the calm of someone used to worse storms. The auction moved quickly. Old snowmobiles, scrap metal, a pile of tires, nothing worth the trouble. Then came the final lot, an old shipping container, its sides blistered with rust, half buried in snow. The auctioneer read from his clipboard. "Lot 39, unclaimed freight container, unknown contents, as is condition, starting bid $5. The group laughed. "That thing's worth more in tetanus shots," someone shouted. Ethan didn't laugh. Something about the container drew his attention. The rust on one side formed a strange pattern, almost like writing. He stepped closer, squinting through the snowfall. Faded beneath the grime were stenciled words barely visible. Ward 17, Quiet Timber. $5, Ethan said simply. The auctioneer looked surprised. "You serious?" Ethan nodded. "5 even." "Sold," the man called, banging his clipboard like a gavel. Laughter rippled through the group. Sarah shook her head, signing the receipt. You just bought a frozen coffin full of junk, Maureen, she teased. Ethan smiled faintly. Guess I'm just curious if Rust can tell stories. Sarah chuckled, scribbling the paperwork. If it does, I'm charging you extra for translation. When he returned to the truck, Valor was waiting, tail thumping once against the seat. Don't look at me like that, Ethan muttered, rubbing the dog's head. You followed me into worse. They hitched the container and drove north. The blizzard thickened, swallowing the road until it felt as though they were moving through a tunnel of white. Ethan's mind wandered as he drove, to the desert heat that had once seared his skin, to the men he had lost, to the silence that followed gunfire. The snow reminded him of ash. War had taught him to distrust quiet. It often came before something terrible. He reached his property by dusk. The cabin stood low and square, its chimney coughing thin smoke into the freezing air. He parked the truck near the old shed and stepped out, boots sinking into snow. The air smelled of pine and iron. Valor leapt down, sniffing the container, tail low but wagging. The dog paused near the faded lettering and barked once, sharp and uncertain. What is it, boy? Ethan crouched beside him. The metal was cold enough to burn his glove. He ran a hand over the letters. Beneath the rust was a small dent. No, not a dent, a scratch mark, long and curved like something had clawed the steel. A flicker of unease moved through him. He told himself it was nothing. Years in the military had trained him to see patterns even where none existed. But still, he felt the faint tug of curiosity, the same pull that had made him raise his hand at the auction. That night, the storm worsened. The wind howled through the trees, shaking the roof. Ethan sat by the fire, Valor lying at his feet. He poured himself black coffee from the old percolator, its smell sharp and bitter. The flames reflected off the container outside, making it look almost alive, breathing beneath the snow. He told himself he would open it in the morning. But sleep did not come easily. Every creak of the cabin sounded like a footstep. Every gust of wind felt like a whisper against the glass. Valor stirred once, ears twitching, a low growl rumbling from his chest. Ethan placed a hand on the dog's back. Easy, he said softly. It's just the wind. Still, even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed it. The words, quiet timber, echoed in his mind like an old call sign, like something half-remembered from a life that no longer belonged to him. He stared into the fire until the logs collapsed in a shower of sparks. The orange glow faded into the blue of dawn. Outside, the container waited beneath a fresh coat of snow, its surface gleaming faintly in the first light. From inside the cabin, Ethan could swear he heard something, a faint metallic creak like steel shifting under pressure. Valor lifted his head, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the frost-covered window. Ethan held his breath, listening. The sound came again, soft, deliberate, like movement from within. He set down his coffee, the old instincts flickering awake, and whispered, "You heard that too, didn't you, boy?" Valor's only answer was a low growl, steady and certain, aimed toward the rusted box that no longer seemed quite so empty. The first light of dawn spilled pale across the valley, washing the world in shades of silver and blue. Ethan Briggs stood at his cabin window, a mug of coffee steaming in his hands, eyes fixed on the container half buried in snow. The storm had eased overnight, leaving a fragile calm that always felt temporary, like the silence after gunfire. Valor sat beside him, tail still, ears pricked toward the same spot outside. There it was again. The faint metallic groan, not loud, but deliberate, as if the steel itself was exhaling after years of holding its breath. Ethan's instincts tightened. In Afghanistan, that same tension had meant a tripwire under dust or a sound in the dark that didn't belong. He set the mug down and grabbed his gloves, the old ones patched at the palms, and stepped into the cold. The snow crunched beneath his boots, each sound swallowed almost instantly by the still air. The container stood like a rusted tomb, streaked with frost. He circled it slowly, scanning for signs of movement, half ashamed of how his pulse quickened at the thought that something might be inside. At the rear corner, near where Valor had barked the night before, he noticed a small gap where the metal met the frozen ground. Fresh snow had been disturbed there, but by what? He couldn't tell. He crouched, brushed away a thin crust of ice, and caught the faintest draft of air, warm, almost imperceptible. Impossible, he muttered. The box should have been sealed for decades. Valor sniffed the gap, then whined softly, stepping back. By mid-morning, the sky was a dull gray sheet. Ethan fetched a crowbar from his truck, pried open the container's corroded latch, and pulled. The hinges shrieked like something waking unwillingly. Inside, darkness breathed out, a stale mix of oil, rust, and time. Dust floated like snow in the slanted light. He hesitated, hand resting on the metal frame. Part of him wanted to walk away, close it back up, and forget this foolish curiosity. But another part, the Marine in him, couldn't. He had been trained never to leave an unanswered sound behind. He switched on his flashlight. The beam swept across a chaotic interior, broken crates, rusted tools, torn tarps, and a half-collapsed shelf. The air carried a faint metallic tang. He stepped inside carefully, floorboards groaning beneath his weight. Valor followed, close to his leg, nose twitching. In the far corner, under a heap of splintered wood, something caught the light, a metallic reflection, dull and rounded. Ethan crouched and brushed away the debris, revealing a rusted metal box about the size of a suitcase. Its surface was etched with faint initials, JRW. Ethan ran a thumb over the letters. "Whitlow," he whispered. The name from the container's label, Ward 17, Quiet Timber. A memory stirred. Sarah had mentioned once, during her small talk at the auction, that a ranger named Whitlow had gone missing decades ago while investigating illegal logging near the northern timberline. The case was never solved. Ethan straightened, suddenly aware of the strange alignment of things, his impulsive purchase, the location, the markings, the name. He dragged the box into the light and tried to open it, but the latch refused to budge. He fetched the crowbar again, wedged it under the edge, and pried. The lock gave with a crack that echoed like a rifle shot in the still air. Inside were bundles of papers, a leather-bound journal, and an old military-style compass. The smell of mildew and oil rose faintly. He opened the journal. The handwriting was tight and deliberate, the ink faded but legible. The first entry read, "If you are reading this, I hope the forest still stands." Before he could read more, Valor stiffened. The dog's ears twitched toward the trees. A second later, Ethan heard it too, a crunch of snow from beyond the clearing. He turned off the flashlight and moved silently to the door, peering out into the white expanse. Nothing. Just the forest breathing slow and indifferent. Still, he could feel the hair rise on his neck. He knew what it meant to be watched. He waited until the unease faded, then returned to the box. The journal's later pages mentioned coordinates, shipments, and coded entries about something called Project Grove. The last entry was dated 1989. Ethan flipped through quickly, catching phrases like illegally cut sections, forged permits, and "they're coming tonight." He frowned. This wasn't just a ranger's log. It was evidence. A knock startled him, 3 sharp raps against the metal door. He turned fast, hand instinctively moving toward where a sidearm would have been years ago. Through the doorway stepped a man bundled in a thick parka, face half hidden under a fur-lined hood. He carried a coil of rope over one shoulder and smiled easily. "Didn't mean to scare you, neighbor," he said, voice warm and gravelly. "Name's Hank Murdoch, live about 2 miles west. Saw smoke from your chimney and figured I'd say hi." Ethan studied him. Hank was in his mid-50s, heavy-set, with a short beard peppered gray. His nose had the look of one broken long ago, and his eyes were the color of river ice, bright, cold, and knowing. Something about his calm made Ethan uneasy. He had the easy friendliness of someone who'd learned to earn trust quickly. "Morning," Ethan replied, cautious. "Didn't expect visitors this far out." Hank chuckled. "Not many of us left up here. Used to be more before the companies cut through the North Ridge. You hunting?" "Not today." Hank's gaze drifted to the open container. "That yours?" "Just bought it. Junk mostly." Hank nodded, too casually. "Well, junk's got stories. I used to see one like it back when I worked for the Timber Survey. Red paint, rusted corners. Funny thing, those containers. Most of them held more than just tools." The words lingered like frostbite. "That so?" Ethan asked. "Yeah," Hank smiled, then adjusted his hood. "You be careful poking around. Winter likes to keep her secrets buried." He gave Valor a brief glance, eyes narrowing slightly before he turned back toward the trees. Ethan watched him leave, the man's shape fading into the snow. When the silence returned, it felt heavier than before. He looked down at the open journal again. The last line read, "If they find this, they'll silence me, but truth has roots deeper than fear." By afternoon, clouds thickened again, threatening more snow. Ethan carried the journal inside, spread it on the table, and began reading in earnest. The entries grew increasingly frantic near the end, describing convoys moving at night, falsified documents, and threats from unnamed officials. It all pointed to something big, an organized operation to strip protected forest under the guise of legal permits. Valor suddenly barked, deep and sharp, facing the window. Outside, near the tree line, a faint set of footprints appeared, fresh against the snow, leading away from where Hank had come. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. The prints were heavy, deliberate, and they circled the container before heading back into the woods. He reached out to close the journal but paused, his eyes catching a single note scrawled at the bottom margin of one page. "If you ever find Ward 17, look beneath the floor." Ethan stood slowly, heart thudding. The words hung in his mind like a whisper from the dead. He turned toward the container again, the open doorway now just a frame of gray light and drifting snow. Valor whined softly beside him, tail low. Ethan's voice came out quiet, almost reverent. "Looks like we're not done yet, boy." Outside, the wind rose again, scattering snow across the clearing. The footprints were already beginning to fade, but the sense of being watched remained, sharp as the cold. The storm returned that night, heavier than before, smothering the valley in a white silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Ethan Briggs sat at his kitchen table with the old journal open in front of him, its pages yellowed and curling at the edges. The lantern flickered, throwing restless shadows on the log walls. Valor lay by the hearth, head resting on his paws, eyes half open and alert. Outside, the wind rattled the cabin's shutters like distant gunfire. Ethan had spent the evening rereading Whitlow's final entries, tracing every line, every smudge of ink as if the man's thoughts might still linger between the words. "Look beneath the floor." The phrase refused to leave his mind. Beneath what floor? The cabins or the containers? He turned to glance out the window. The container loomed faintly under the falling snow, its rusted surface catching the weak light like an ember refusing to die. He pulled on his coat and gloves, slung a lantern over his shoulder, and stepped into the cold. Valor followed, silent but tense. The air bit his face as he crossed the yard, snow crunching under his boots. When he reached the container, the sound of the storm faded strangely, as if the steel walls absorbed the wind's roar. Inside, the air was stale but warmer, heavy with the scent of old oil and earth. He swept the light across the floor, wooden boards laid years ago, warped and cracked. In one corner, near the wall where he'd found the metal box, the boards seemed slightly uneven. He knelt, ran his glove across them, then took the crowbar and pried gently. The plank lifted with a groan. Beneath it was darkness, a small hollow space packed with dust and splinters. He lowered the lantern, and the light revealed a tin case, flat and sealed with wax. His breath caught. He reached in, pulled it free, and brushed away grime to reveal an engraved mark, U.S. Department of Forestry, 1983. The seal had been deliberately scratched out. Ethan opened the latch carefully. Inside were several rolls of film negatives, a small reel labeled Night Convoy 12-1789, and a handful of faded photographs showing logging trucks at night, their headlights cutting through mist. In the corner of one photo stood a figure wearing a ranger's coat, Whitlow. As he studied the evidence, a memory flickered. Sarah Whitmore at the auction, her offhand remark about unclaimed government property and the quiet timber district. He decided he'd need to speak with her again. But before that, another sound froze him, the sharp snap of a twig outside. Valor stiffened, growling low. Ethan extinguished the lantern instantly. Through the open doorway, a dim silhouette passed near the trees, tall, hooded, moving deliberately. Then a beam of light cut through the snow, sweeping across the yard. Someone else was here. Ethan pressed against the wall, holding Valor still by the collar. The flashlight lingered on the cabin for a moment, then turned toward the container. Footsteps crunched closer, slow and steady. Whoever it was stopped near the entrance. Ethan could hear breathing, heavy, measured. Then the beam flicked off. Silence. For a long moment, neither man nor dog moved. Then, from somewhere deeper in the forest, an engine started, coughing once before fading into the storm. Ethan waited another full minute before he exhaled. He stepped outside, lantern low. The footprints were fresh, half filled with snow, leading toward the old logging road beyond the ridge. Someone had been watching him again. "We're not alone in this, boy," he murmured. Valor's ears twitched, and he pressed closer to Ethan's leg. By morning, the storm had calmed to a slow drizzle of snowflakes. Ethan packed the tin case and the journal into a canvas bag, then drove down the narrow county road to the small town square. The world outside Jackson Hole looked half buried, fences like bones under the snow, the river glazed with ice. He parked in front of the county administration office, a modest two-story building of brick and fading green trim. Inside, the air smelled of dust and coffee. Sarah Whitmore looked up from her desk when he entered. Today, her auburn hair was loose, curls escaping from under a knitted cap. She had dark circles under her eyes but smiled faintly. "Mr. Briggs," she said, teasing, "back to return your $5 treasure?" "Not exactly." Ethan placed the tin case on her desk. "You ever hear of a ranger named Whitlow?" Sarah's smile faded. "John Whitlow, of course. He disappeared in '89, somewhere north of Quiet Timber. They never found him. Why?" Ethan opened the case. The photos gleamed faintly under the fluorescent light. "Because I think I just did." She leaned closer, brow furrowing as she picked up one of the photographs. These look real. Where did you get them?" "Inside the container. It was his." For a moment, the room was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. Then Sarah exhaled slowly. "My father worked in the forestry department back then. He said Whitlow was the only one who wouldn't sign off on the cutting permits. He thought the companies were bribing inspectors, but nobody listened. After he vanished, they shut the case fast. Too fast." She looked up, her expression tightening. "You shouldn't have brought this here, Ethan." "Why not?" "Because if these photos are real, someone's been keeping this buried for 30 years, and they won't like that you dug it up." Before Ethan could respond, the glass door swung open. A man entered, stamping snow from his boots. He was in his late 40s, tall and lean, with sharp cheekbones and a trimmed beard. His uniform bore the insignia of the Wyoming State Forestry Division. "Morning, Ms. Whitmore," he said smoothly. "Didn't expect visitors." Sarah's tone shifted, instantly polite. "Morning, Deputy Ranger Collins." Ethan turned slightly, measuring him. Collins' posture was too relaxed, his smile too practiced. His eyes, pale blue, flicked once to the tin case on the desk. "You folks talking forestry business?" he asked. "Just some old records," Sarah replied quickly, sliding the case partially shut. Collins chuckled. "Records have a way of stirring trouble. Best let the past stay buried, don't you think?" Ethan met his gaze evenly. "Depends on what's buried." Collins' smile didn't reach his eyes. "Careful out there, Mr. Briggs. Those mountains keep secrets better than most men." He tipped his hat, nodded to Sarah, and left as quietly as he'd arrived. Ethan waited until the door closed, then said, "Friend of yours?" "Hardly," she muttered. "He's been sniffing around the Quiet Timber files for years. Claims he's protecting state interests. I think he's protecting someone else." Ethan nodded, gathering the documents. "Then I'll keep this safe." "Ethan," she said softly, "if Whitlow was right, whatever's under those permits isn't just corruption. It's something bigger. Please be careful." Outside, the sky had darkened again, a wall of gray sweeping down from the north. Ethan climbed into his truck, Valor beside him, the tin case on the seat between them. As he turned the ignition, a glint caught his eye, a reflection from his side mirror. Parked 2 blocks behind him was a dark SUV, engine running, no plates. Its windows were tinted black. Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Looks like we've got company, Valor." He pulled out slowly, watching the mirror. The SUV waited a moment, then followed. The storm swallowed the road as the 2 vehicles disappeared into the falling snow. The wind that evening howled low through the pines, heavy with the taste of snow and iron. Ethan Briggs drove deeper into the mountains, headlights cutting through the storm as the dark SUV followed at a steady distance. Valor sat tense in the passenger seat, fur bristling, every muscle ready. Ethan's fingers tightened on the wheel. He had learned to read pursuit. On the battlefield, silence could be more dangerous than the first gunshot. Now, the silence behind him felt almost tactical. He killed his lights, turned sharply onto a logging road half buried in snow, and let the truck roll to a stop behind a cluster of firs. The SUV passed the intersection, its lights sweeping across the trees before vanishing down the main road. Ethan waited 30 seconds, listening to his heartbeat slow. When he finally exhaled, Valor whined softly, ears flicking. "Yeah," Ethan whispered. "They're not done yet." He waited another minute, then turned the engine back on and drove toward home through the maze of old timber trails. The snow thickened, cloaking the road in white confusion. By the time he reached his cabin, it was well past midnight. The fireplace had gone cold. He brought the tin case and Whitlow's journal to the table, lit a lamp, and began photographing the documents with his old phone. The pictures weren't perfect, but if anything happened, someone had to know what he'd found. He saved them to a hidden drive, then buried the flash device beneath the loose floorboard under his bed. When the knock came, it wasn't loud. It was steady, deliberate. 3 taps, like the rhythm of a code. Ethan's eyes met Valor's. The dog rose, silent as a shadow. Ethan slipped the safety off his old hunting rifle, opened the door a crack, and found Hank Murdoch standing on the porch, coat dusted with snow. "Evening, neighbor," Hank said, voice calm. "Sorry to drop by late. Thought I saw your truck coming in fast. Everything all right?" Ethan studied him in the lamplight. Hank looked the same as before, broad frame, calm eyes, but now something under that calm felt heavier. "You followed me?" Hank's mouth twitched into a faint smile. "Follow's a strong word. Let's call it concern. These roads get bad after dark." Ethan stepped back slowly, keeping the rifle between them. "You work for Collins?" For the first time, Hank's expression shifted, something like amusement. "Collins works for me, technically. He's forestry on paper. But this isn't about departments anymore. It's about what you found in that box." Ethan didn't answer. Hank's gaze flicked briefly toward Valor. "Good dog. Smart, too. Shame what they did to Whitlow. He thought he could save something that wasn't meant to be saved." Ethan's stomach turned cold. "You were part of it." "I was part of keeping the peace," Hank replied evenly. "The kind of peace that lets families eat, mills run, towns survive. Whitlow didn't understand that. He thought morality was worth more than money." He sighed, almost regretful. "Now you've stirred it all up again." Ethan said nothing. His thumb rested against the trigger guard, not yet tightening. Hank's tone softened. "I'm giving you a chance, Briggs. You hand over the materials, everything, and this ends quietly. You get to keep your life the way it is. Solitude, the dog, the silence. You earned that much, I figure." Ethan felt the echo of desert heat in his memory. The negotiations before an ambush. The way lies always came wrapped in calm voices. He shook his head slowly. "I've seen what happens when silence wins." For a moment, the 2 men stood motionless, snow swirling between them. Then, Hank's eyes hardened. "That's a shame." He turned and walked down the path toward the trees, his boots leaving deliberate prints in the snow. "You can't outrun this, Marine," he called over his shoulder. "The forest forgets nothing." Ethan closed the door and leaned against it, pulse still racing. Valor padded over, pressing his head against Ethan's knee. The man exhaled. "Guess we just made it official." At dawn, the storm broke. Ethan packed the most important items, the tin case, the copied photos, a few rounds of ammunition, and loaded them into the truck. He drove toward town, but as he neared the ridge, smoke curled faintly above the tree line. His gut clenched. The smoke was rising from the direction of his cabin. He pulled over, climbed out, and watched from a distance as black plumes bled into the pale sky. His home, his refuge, was burning. By the time he reached it, the cabin was a skeleton of charred beams. The air reeked of gasoline. Whoever had come moved quickly, professionally. Ethan sifted through the ruins with gloved hands until Valor barked near the back wall. There, buried under collapsed timber, he found the floorboard where he'd hidden the flash drive, pried open, empty. He knelt, shoulders heavy, ash clinging to his coat. "They took it, boy." Valor whined softly, tail low. "We've got one chance left, the originals." He patted the tin case. The crunch of tires on snow made him freeze. A dark SUV rolled into the clearing, engine low, doors opening before it stopped. Two men in dark coats stepped out, faces obscured by scarves. One carried a shotgun. The other, taller, walked forward and said quietly, "Mr. Briggs, you need to come with us." Ethan straightened, rifle slung but ready. "You tell Murdoch I'm not surrendering anything." The man paused, then smiled beneath his scarf. "Mr. Murdoch's not the one asking." Ethan's grip tightened. Valor growled, muscles coiled. Snow drifted down in slow, quiet flakes between them, a fragile curtain before violence. And then, somewhere far down the mountain, came the distant wail of a siren, one, then two, echoing through the valley. The men turned their heads slightly, uncertain. Ethan seized the moment, grabbed the case, and ran for the tree line with Valor at his side. The forest swallowed them both, leaving behind the hiss of fire and the faint sound of approaching engines. The snowstorm had passed, leaving behind a silence so deep that even the trees seemed to hold their breath. Ethan Briggs crouched beneath a fallen pine. Valor pressed close against his leg. The dog's breath came in visible puffs, his ears flicking at every sound. The forest stretched endless around them, white, wounded, but alive. In the distance, faint red and blue lights blinked through the fog where sirens still echoed across the valley. Whoever had set the fire was now being hunted by someone else. For the first time, Ethan wasn't the only one chasing the truth. He waited until the sound faded, then moved east toward the ridge. He knew the terrain, every frozen stream, every trap of hidden ice. Valor trotted ahead, stopping often to glance back, as if asking if his human could keep up. "Easy, boy," Ethan whispered. "We've still got work to do." Hours later, when the sky began to pale, he spotted the old ranger tower rising above the treetops, a skeletal frame of metal and wood against the dawn. Whitlow had mentioned it in his journal. The last safe place. Ethan climbed, Valor whining softly below. At the top, the view cut through the valley like a memory. From there, he could see smoke rising from his burned cabin, the faint trail of tire marks leading north toward quiet timber. The same direction Hank had gone. He set the tin case on the platform and began sorting through the photos again. The evidence was undeniable. Dates, coordinates, official signatures, all leading back to Murdoch and the companies that had stripped the forest for profit. He thought of Whitlow, of the note carved into the journal's back cover. "The forest will remember what men forget." The crunch of boots on snow below drew his gaze. Someone was climbing the tower. Ethan raised his rifle. "That's close enough," he called. The voice that answered was tired but familiar. "Ethan, it's me, Sarah." She appeared on the ladder, breathless and dusted with snow. Her cheeks were red, her eyes fierce. "I followed the sirens. Collins and his men are gone. Federal agents from Cheyenne took over the scene." "How'd you find me?" She held up her phone. "You sent me one of those photos last night. It had GPS data. I figured you'd head for higher ground." Ethan exhaled. "You shouldn't have come. They're still out there." "I know," she said softly, stepping onto the platform beside him. "But you can't do this alone." For a moment, they stood in silence, the wind tugging at their coats. Down below, Valor paced in circles, restless. Sarah looked over the valley. "You were right. My father kept copies of those permits before he died. I found them in his old file cabinet this morning. Everything matches what Whitlow wrote. He was trying to expose a federal cover-up. Collins and Murdoch were paid to erase it." Ethan felt a cold clarity settle in. "Then we finish what he started." Before Sarah could answer, the crack of a rifle split the air. A bullet tore through the wooden railing inches from her hand. Ethan dropped, pulling her down. "Sniper!" he shouted. Valor barked furiously below. They crawled to the far side of the tower. Another shot rang out, splintering the wood behind them. Ethan leaned out just far enough to spot movement among the trees. A figure in a dark parka, steady and patient. He recognized the stance. "Collins," he muttered. "He's not done cleaning up." He waited for the next shot, then moved fast, aiming where the flash had been. His rifle kicked once. Silence followed. The wind carried a faint thud. Then, nothing. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched the railing. "You think—" Ethan nodded grimly. "He's down." He looked out toward the valley. Sirens were rising again, closer this time. They must have tracked the gunfire. Minutes later, two black helicopters appeared above the ridge, blades beating the air. One bore the seal of the U.S. Forestry Service, the other the Department of Justice. Agents in heavy winter gear fanned out below. Ethan raised both hands, the rifle slung harmlessly across his back. Sarah did the same. An agent climbed up, his badge catching the light. "Mr. Briggs?" he asked. "We've been following your transmissions. Ms. Whitmore contacted us with your evidence. You did the right thing." Ethan's expression was weary but resolute. "Then make it count." They descended together. Valor bounded forward to meet them, tail wagging, snow spraying from his fur. For the first time in weeks, Ethan smiled. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with light from the sky. They come quietly, through people who refuse to give up when silence feels easier. Ethan didn't find treasure inside that rusty container. He found truth, the kind that costs something to carry, but heals everything it touches. And maybe that's how God works in our lives too. He hides his miracles in ordinary moments. A loyal dog, a brave choice, a single act of faith when the world turns cold. If you're watching this tonight, remember, no truth stays buried forever, and no winter lasts forever either. Keep walking, keep believing, and keep your heart open for the quiet ways God still speaks. Before you go, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Share this story if you believe faith can still move mountains. And if you want to keep hearing stories that remind you of light in dark places, hit subscribe, ring the bell, and join us again next time. May God bless you, your home, and everyone who still believes that redemption, like spring after the longest winter, always finds its way back.